wildlife biologist, and this is my husband, Jason. And this whole vacation has been in the works for quite a few years. I actually had a volunteer that worked for me when I was in Bethel, and she worked with Kakapo. And so we talked about Kakapo, and we were talking about the projects that she was involved in. And I was like, oh my God, I would love to get over there and work with these things. And after that summer, she decided that she really needed to get revenge on me, because I had put her through quite a bit being a volunteer, had her doing a lot of hard work, putting in some long hours, and she's like, oh yeah, you can come work for me, you know? And so last spring, she called me up and said, if you're serious about this, 2016 is the year that you need to come. It's going to be a huge, huge breeding year. And so we started planning the trip, and poor Jason kind of knew. Jen, my friend Jen, is a big birder. I like birds, and he kind of knew that this whole vacation would be tailored more to bird watching than anything else. So he was a really good sport and kind of came along for the ride. So here we go. We'll talk a little bit about our vacation and some of the birds we saw there, and then I'll go into a little bit more detail about the Kakapo.
So we left Cordova, left the Delta and mountains behind, just for war mountains in New Zealand. Remarkably similar. We actually landed in Auckland on the North Island, and then hopped a domestic flight down to Queenstown on the South Island. And Queenstown was actually absolutely gorgeous when we got there. You can see that photo here, and this is right on the lake. Definitely a touristy town. They've got all kinds of things you can do there. Take tours on boat, take a submarine that's like a shark.
It was crazy. I call it Sharknado. I don't think it's called Sharknado, but it's a shark. It has a driver, and then there's one passenger. It goes under the water, and all you'll see is the fin, and then it will jump out and then land. It was freaking crazy.
I want one.
I wanted to do it. I was like, please, can do that. But we decided to. It was pretty cool.
They also have parasailing right there, of course, too.
And so we had beautiful weather. We were in Queenstown for 2 days. We kept watching the weather because we had this really big hike that we were going to do. We were going to do a great walk. It was going to be 3 days and 2 nights. And we kept watching the weather. It was supposed to be really great for our walk. We were really excited. But then, you know, as the days got closer, the weather kind of started to turn. But when we were in Queenstown, we did see a few birds. This is the Australian grebe. And we saw gray ducks, which are similar to our mallard. They also have mallards there as well. We had black-billed gulls and black-backed gulls as well. Scott, there were coots, kind of those classic city birds that you would expect to see. So we spent the 2 days in Queenstown, and then we headed down to the Rupert.
Yep, and they have a shuttle that you actually take to get to the trail. I don't remember, it was like $20 a person, I think. But they actually stop off here in Glenorchy, just a small little village, but kind of scenic, little tiny village in the middle of nowhere really. But it'd be in the middle of nowhere, it'd be great to be. So we hit the trailhead at Rupert Track. So our first bit, we were going to go to the Rupert Flats. So our first day was actually pretty short, about a 2-hour hike. And so we took off. You can see it was getting a little overcast right out of the chute. And you'll notice the trails are actually really well maintained on the great walks. They're remarkably wide in many places where you can walk 2 abreast. And very similar to Cordova actually, in the terrain as far as plant life and trees. Most of the trees it's all beech forest.
So instead of hemlock, it was beech. But otherwise it looked like the same. It's just mossy green,
Yeah, mossy.
Tons of ferns.
So, gorgeous views pretty much the entire walk. Lots of bridges in the first portion of it. I think there was like 7 bridge crossings.
It's like swinging bridges. Some of them more swingy than others.
And this would be the place to harvest fiddleheads.
Can you imagine this place in the spring? This would be crazy.
Yeah. And we did manage to see some birds. Unfortunately, with the weather, we weren't able to get too many good photos. So this one we actually borrowed. And you'll notice this guy's
So
photos.
yeah, Jake Osborne is one of the guys that was part of the Kakapo team. He's a Kakapo ranger, and he takes phenomenal photos. photos, so I did borrow quite a few of his photos, just because these birds are so quick and we just didn't have the time to sit there and spend hours trying to capture each one, so.
That's a rifleman?
Rifleman,
I don't know my birds, I'm working on it.
which was really common as we were walking this first part of the trail.
So, like I said, it was a short hike, and this is kind of the flat area that we had planned. We ended up at to camp for that night, and the first thing we kept thinking was, where is the bear in the middle of this open area?
we couldn't believe, we're gonna camp here tonight,
Yeah,
I don't think this is a good idea.
good.
And then we realized, oh yeah, they don't have
Yeah.
bears, there's no fox, there's
There's no
nothing to worry about.
But yeah, you can see there's a little creek there, so we got to spend the night next to a flowing creek, which actually rose about 2 feet overnight because of the high rains.
So what was kind of funny was we got to the campsite, it started to rain, and we had these shell ducks that were hanging out, and I was just like, oh my God, there's shell ducks! And I was taking photos and going crazy, and Jason's like, we need to set the tent up, it's starting to rain. And I was like, let me just one more photo, I just did one more photo, but all of our photos turned out pretty blurry, so I borrowed this one again, but that's the shell duck. And it ended up raining pretty much all night, like Jason said. The rivers rose about 2 feet, 2 to 3 feet, and other people that were at the campsite actually got flooded out.
Yeah,
They kind of tented in some low areas. So we had walked around the campsite and we were like, oh, we should probably choose something a little bit higher.
So down there in the valley is actually where we camped out that night.
And this is the second day, so we had kind of walked up the hill. And we had stopped and talked with one of the rangers there and asked how the weather was, and she's like, yeah, it's gonna rain all day. And we were like, all right, so what does that mean for the trail? Like, is it gonna be okay? You know, are we gonna run a new pound? She's like, you'll be fine. And we had a 7-mile hike, or a 7-hour hike, excuse me. And so we were like, are you sure? Because like, once we start this, we can't, we're not gonna be able to turn around, you know? She's like, it'll be fine. And we're like, all right, so we started.
But benefit of lots of rain was lots of waterfalls.
Beautiful waterfalls.
Yeah, as you see, the trails are actually, because they are so well maintained, they thankfully drain quite well. At least on the first half.
Yeah, lots of water.
Another good example of how well the trails are maintained, they actually have some railings in some spots, in case you did bring trekking poles.
Yeah.
And again, the said trails are just spectacular. Very well maintained. And this was Rootburn Falls. This is up toward the hut. So if you were not tenting it, you'd probably stop at the Rootburn Falls hut and stay the night there. I believe that the hut slept like 60 people.
It was huge. It was beautiful. We were like, why did we stay in that hut?
Yeah, it was gorgeous. And this was just up past the Rootburn Falls hut, looking back toward it. At this point, yeah, it was pretty much downpour. This was like the one clearing that I had to take a single photo.
All the trails were it was just running water. We were
Yeah,
just,
we were walking an active creek.
yeah, it was ankle deep, and at times it was kind of going over our boots, so it didn't
Yeah.
take long before our boots were completely soaked. And we were completely soaked, and it was just, all right, let's keep going.
But you're still smiling.
Yeah, I mean, it was still beautiful.
Real picture,
Yeah, the picture, right? The show.
So after about 7 hours of hiking, we arrived, basically, I don't know if you can see in the very center, there's actually some structures down there. And that is where we're staying for the night. And at this point, it's raining sideways and rain is stinging your face. And we started getting thunder and lightning.
Which never happens, I guess. They never get thunder and lightning. And there was just cracks of lightning, and we were up on this ridge like, we probably shouldn't be up
Yeah,
here.
so this last little bit of the trail, even though we were really tired, went really quick.
We like ran up.
So thankfully, we made it down to the shelter and were able to dry out. Apparently, we were the only crazy people that were camping that night. So we have the whole shelter to ourselves, and we took full advantage of that.
So these are pretty cool. They have, all the campsites have these shelters, and they're all a little bit different. So the first campsite we stayed at actually had 2 separate shelters, but they all have running water, and they all have these really nice areas that you can wash the dishes and prepare food, and there's usually clotheslines and things. So when we were doing this trek, about midway through, there was a place called Harris Saddle that you could stop, and there was a shelter up on top. And we were talking to some of the other folks that were walking, and they were all like, we are supposed to camp tonight, and we are not doing it. We are going to stay in a hut. And we were like, we're gonna camp, I mean, whatever, you know, so it was total crap, and it was just pouring, and it was windy, but about halfway through the night, the rain stopped, and the winds picked up. And so when we woke up the next morning, everything was dry, you know, and yeah, it was awesome.
Except I got hit in the head with the
Multiple
tent all night. Slapped me in the face. That was great. But we were still happy to get moving because it actually wasn't raining in the morning. That lasted for about an hour or 2 hours.
Mhm.
But as you can see, it was still socked in the entire time. So gorgeous views were limited.
We were told this was one of the most beautiful great walks because of the views, and that's all we saw for 3 days. And we were like, oh.
It's really disheartening, yeah. But every now and then you get a
sucker hole.
sucker hole and see something through it.
And you knew there was like epic
So,
view over there.
but again, more beautiful waterfalls.
This was one that actually pours down onto the trail itself. And the ranger at the second camp had told us that this could be a problem area. The day before, because of the rain, people were having an issue crossing, and they have a detour where you go down and back up, and they were having problems even at the detour. And so he had told us, when you get to this waterfall, you need to be really, really careful. And if you feel like you cannot cross, come back. And we were like, okay, you know, and it ended up being fine. We ended up taking the detour just to be safe, because the water, I mean, it was pretty crazy how much water was coming off that waterfall, but yeah, we were able to cross, no problem. Oh, this is a, I don't know if this will work.
You can just hit, okay, yeah, that one.
Is this a video? Do you want me to put
Yeah,
it on
can
your
you just
computer?
like click on it?
Yeah, this is actually the waterfall.
I don't know how I click with this thing.
Where's the...
Just click
Select.
anywhere. Just click on it.
A lot of the trail was like this too, where it was, you know, a few inches of water on the entire trail.
What were the temperatures?
I think it was around.
Oh, so
And then it was
Yeah, it was-
blowing. I mean, every curve we came around was just like wind, you know. And
Yeah,
so it was pretty cool.
yeah, they were soaked to
Considering.
the bone. So-
But, you know, we got down to the bottom. We saw my friend Jen sitting in her nice warm car waiting for us, and we were able to change our clothes. And you know, it was like, and then she told us, she's like, I am so sorry. And I was like, why? And she's like, you were in the red. The weather was red. You were red. That's the worst. That's the worst it can be. And that's what you've been in for the last 2 days. And we were like, it's fine. We made it. So our next stop was Tiano, which is kind of where we based out of for the rest of our trip.
So Kepler track, another, one of the great walks. We didn't do the entire thing, we just wanted to do a little bit of the first portion. Actually, the very first portion is like dead flat for, gosh, I don't know, a couple miles, really leisurely. But yeah, again, beautiful ferns and vegetation. And actually, our friend Jen was saying, you know, we asked her what kind of birds we'd see, and she's like, no, probably not many. And right after that,
We saw
we
Kia.
saw Kia. And I think we ended up seeing 2 or 3 unique Kia that day.
Yeah. And they were super chatty. I have some videos of them chatting. So can you hit the video again, please? So this is a classic Kia call. Oop,
Did I do that?
I might have done it.
I'm just trying to figure out. Sorry.
This is a. That's us making the call. And then this one, oops. And then this one, if you can click on this one, it was making some really weirdo calls, and I guess I don't remember. I thought it was pretty cool. So we like listened to this one. Yeah. So we figured, Jen figured it was probably a juvenile just because of how talkative he was, and he was making just, yeah, some really, really weird noises. But we stayed with him for quite a while, and then afterwards we just had time to go, okay, we gotta just leave the bird, and hiked up the rest of the hill to the top. And Jen promised us views. So this was like our views, and you can see it's kind of rainy again. But we did get to see some mountains that day, so it was pretty fun.
It's like the copper and the fleece hat.
Yeah. And so then the next day, Jen had worked at a Takahe research center, and so Takahe are another endangered species. There's not too many of them left. It's around 200 maybe or so. And so she's like, do you want to see some? And we're like, yeah, I want to see some. And so she took us to this facility where they captively raise them. It's a very hands-off facility where they just kind of, the birds are just roaming around, and they'll raise them to a certain age and then they'll release them into the wild. And so there are a couple wild populations, but they're really hard to get to. So we went into the facility, and we had to wear these boots, and we had to wash in this special sanitizer. And then we climbed into the pen with these ladders that are actually collapsible, and it folds into the pen so that predators can't get in and out. And so this is Takahe habitat. It's this bunch grass. I believe it was called red sedge. And so, I mean, you can't see anything. You can hear them in there. You could hear them calling. You could hear them moving around, but you couldn't see anything. And so we had to kind of wait. And eventually they started. Yeah, she had this little like food thing, and they eventually came out. And so this was one of the males. There was a family with a male, a female, and a baby. And so this is the male. Okay. And there's the baby.
So they're like a cooter, almost like cooter or something.
Yeah, they kind of do. I'm not exactly sure what family they're in, but they are a pretty big. I mean, I guess they're not huge, but they come up mid-shin and yeah. Yeah, it's a really cool bird. So that one was really curious. He came right up to us and was checking us out. That was
What's the cause of their decline?
predators, mostly stoats, introduction of stoats, and then possum. So
Yeah,
that's
almost every trail you'll see, and you go there and there's animal traps everywhere to try and manage the stoats.
And with the possums, they eat like an enormous amount of vegetation. So not only are they killing birds and taking eggs and whatever else they were doing, but they also were killing the habitat and destroying the habitat that some of these species were living in.
Remind me what a stoat is.
It's a weasel, essentially. So we spent a couple days in Tiano, kind of resting up, and then we decided to make a trip out to Milford Sound.
And this is just a scenic stop off that we decided to be tourists at. And actually from this one, in the distance is part of the trail that we were on.
That's the root burn. And we got to actually
Yeah,
like, see the views that we missed like 3 days before. We were like, are you serious?
So this is actually on the one, I forget which side of the tunnel, but there's a tunnel that goes through the mountain, going toward Milford Sound, okay. But yeah, as you can see, I mean, the mountains there are just, they just shoot straight up. They're incredible. This is at Milford Sound. And was it Miter Point in the background?
So this is where all the cruise ships and fishing vessels and stuff kind of base out of the sound. And so there are a lot of cruise ships going on, helicopters, and some really kind of touristy place. But that's a shay. That's what they call it. It's like a cormorant. cormorant species, so. Waterfalls and more birdies.
That's one I actually
Yeah.
took. We didn't have to borrow that.
Yeah, there's lots of bellbirds and all sorts of little guys flying around there. And so one of the things that I really wanted to see was a rock wren, and they like this crazy rocky habitat, and so there was this little hike that we could do just off of the road, and so we decided, well, let's just try to look and see if we see anything. And Jen's like, we have to, like, they are going to be here. And I was like, all right, you know, so we kind of walked around. This is some of the views from that little nature trail. We kept looking and looking, and we weren't seeing anything.
There you can actually see the tunnel in the background.
And that tunnel, we found out, there's like little kiosks there, was made,
Those
started by 8 dudes with pickaxes in the middle of winter. And they had these pictures, it was just phenomenal. Like, and like avalanches would happen, and then they'd have to redig and get to where they were. And then
Yeah, there's sites out there, you
continue
can
on.
still see like old construction where they had huts and things, where they stayed while they were building the tunnel.
And we did see rock wrens. So this is a little rock wren. Super cute. They were one of my favorites.
So the next day we were gonna do another hike in that area, so we just camped out. And it was nice to see actually this camping area. We went by at about 3 o'clock in the afternoon, and it was dead. But you wouldn't know from this picture, there was actually probably 80 to 100 people camping out there. So yeah, it was packed. And it got cold that night, a lot colder than we were anticipating. Thankfully, we did have our 30-degree bags, and it frosted that night. So it was crusty tent.
Yeah, so this is one of the other birds we saw. We just randomly, we stopped, we were gonna look for brown teal, which like the rapids, so there was this bridge crossing and there was all this really fast moving water, and Jen had said, oh, we'll probably see some brown teal here, so we should get out, we should kind of look. So we started looking around and we didn't see any teal, but we saw this guy. This is a weka, and he was really photogenic. Like, he didn't care that we were there, he was just doing his thing. But anytime a car came, he'd bolt into the vegetation, and then he'd come back out and he'd walk around. So it's kind of cool. That was our first weka that we saw.
And they are like, what?
Yeah, I mean, yeah,
Yes.
similar to like a chicken. I mean, you know.
Yeah, they basically forage in the ground, and
Yeah,
yeah, they're really interesting.
really interesting bird.
So this is the tunnel, yeah. And here, I don't know if you can see, almost dead in the middle, you can see Melissa and Jen. Just 2 little specks, just to kind of give you an idea of the scale of things.
Yes, this is,
Melissa's actually got her arms up like this.
yeah.
Tough to see. And again, yeah, you can see Melissa and Jen on the middle of that rock there. And there's just gorgeous waterfalls on this trail as well. So we took a little break up toward I don't know, midway point probably. And we can just look back and see the trail. Got a photo of Karen. And yeah, it was just gorgeous views from up there. And here's actually me at the bottom left. My feet were pretty shredded from the root burn, so I elected to stay at the scenic Alpine Lake and let the ladies continue on. And yeah, so they went up to the top.
And this is called, the hike was called Gertrude's Saddle, and so this area is, you know, this saddle that then overlooks this beautiful valley, and then the water out in the distance is actually Milford Sound. So you could see all the way out, and we could see cruise ships, and you could see the planes and stuff doing their, you know, their thing out there. So it was a really spectacular spot.
How high are you?
Oh
What was
man,
that, 1,800 meters or so?
meters, yeah. So
That's what it was.
yeah, it was pretty. Yeah, 5,500 or so.
So yeah, that's that Alpine Lake down there. And then you can see the cable actually running on there. So I guess the rocks tend to get kind of frosty depending on the year, so they have cave lines if you need some assistance. It's actually a lot steeper than it looks, but again, you can see me, I'm still chilling now at the bottom of the lake.
Just chilling.
Wait for them to come back.
Snacks.
So we had another snack on our way down. And it was
Next
the
stop
following
was-
day, yeah, we were headed to Invercargill. And here we were looking at Henry.
Tuatara, yeah, so like, I was like, well, what are you doing in Invercargill? And they were like, everything shuts down at 5:30. So like, we got there midday and we're like, well, what do you do here? And she's like, there's two things. We're gonna go see the Tuatara and we're gonna go to the Stubbery. And we were like, what? And I guess there's this huge garden there, and then they have the Tuatara, and this is Henry. Henry is one of the oldest Tuatara that they know of right now. He's 120 years old. And he's the main male breeder. So he's the main guy.
How
He's
large is
easily
that?
double the size.
What's the scale that we're looking at?
He's probably, what, tail and nose, probably.
He's the biggest. Most of them are only this big or maybe a little bit bigger. He is huge.
Yeah.
Because of his age?
Yeah, and I think because he's a male.
I only know of the Tuatara because as a kid, my parents gave us the Time Life series of books that some of you might have grown up with. And in the reptile edition was a Tuatara, this lizard from New Zealand that grows to be 100 years old, and I was fascinated by that.
And I guess they actually have a third eye.
Oh,
And so when they're babies, they have a third eye that's in the middle of the forehead, and then the skin grows over the eye. But on the young, like on the little babies, they had photos and stuff. You could see this, like, it's weird. Yeah, so that's pretty cool. And then this is the
Premier
Stubbery.
attraction.
Yeah.
And we were told by a friend in that area that if you don't do anything, go to the Stumpery. He said it's the best thing at the museum there. The rose gardens were pretty good, but we were a little late. But yeah, it's basically artwork, art installations using driftwood.
So, I mean, like, yeah, he like made crazy monsters. There was like
The
dragons.
interesting thing to note, however, if you notice everything very pointy, and this is just right next door to the Center for the Blind, which we thought was a little bit off.
They're like, this is from that show. It's made out of the old tree.
And we like this just because they kind of remind us of Cordova from the museum here. And so that night, we decided we were going to hang out at the beach, have some beers, and enjoy the waves crashing in. And actually Stewart Island in the background, where we were headed the next day.
And that's an oyster catcher. A pied oyster catcher. They kept wanting to call, like they have black ones there too, and they're called something different. I can't remember right now off the top of my head. I was like, oh, black oyster catcher. And they're like, nope, that is not. Enjoying the beach.
And there was actually surfers out there. It was cold, but they were still out there.
So yeah, the next stop was Stewart Island. And when we were driving, I mean, we did a lot of driving to get to and from some of these places, and Jen kept saying, like, we're gonna see spoonbills, we're gonna see spoonbills, and I was just like, I don't know, man. And then I kept looking at every little, water hole along the way, and sure enough, on our way to Bluff, to get on the ferry to go to Stewart Island, we saw spoonbills. So that was pretty cool.
So this is in Bluff, and we saw some very similar rope work to Karen's. And so there in Bluff, they have a sign up here where they have all the destinations for the, because it's the southernmost tip of New Zealand. So they have distances to other main locations.
We didn't have Alaska on there though.
So we took this ferry over to Stewart Island. As you can see, it's definitely smaller than what we're used to. I believe it's seated around 60, and it was like
It's an hour.
hour ferry, I believe. And here is in Stewart Island. Actually, it's the town of Oban in the background. That's where the port is. It's actually, you can see the dock in the very center there is the terminal there.
So there's only a couple hundred people that live there. It's the only town on Stewart Island. Most of it's wilderness, and they do have a great walk that you can do there as well, but a lot of it's wilderness. And so we did some walking. They have a bunch of trails that kind of cut through around town and just outside of town, so we did some walking. And on the walk there, we were told there's a bunch of albatross, and so we had the binoculars and we were looking out and we saw, of all things, a fishing boat that was coming in, and the albatross were just all around this fishing boat. And so our pictures, again, we were a little bit too far away, but Jake has an amazing photo of the albatross. So that was really cool to get to see those.
It's a great beach. And these are all on trails that we just walked around town. They're all really well kept. Lots of stairs, but well kept.
And so one of the cool things, the place we stayed with some friends, we stayed with Jake, that's Jake Osborne and his girlfriend, and they had this caca that was just like hanging around their house. So they had caca and they had tui, which were really cool. So, instead of us having like our chickadees and these little cassowaries, these guys have parrots and some of these other really phenomenal species. But there's lots of noise going on. The caca woke us up pretty much every morning. He was very, very vocal. And we did try to do some kiwi hunting. We were pretty much guaranteed to see a kiwi on Stewart Island. This is where you go to see kiwi. And so we went out one night with our headlamps, and Jake has been on the island for quite a few years, so he kind of knew the hot spots. And he told us where to go, and we spent all this time looking, and we didn't see anything. And we were just like, what the heck, I thought we were supposed to be able to see kiwi here. And the next night, we were going to go out, but we just kind of were, like, we're probably not going to see anything. And this girl we were hanging out with walked home, exact same trail we had did the night before, and she saw 3. So I think it was just because we were trying so hard, like just looking everywhere. But so I borrowed this picture to kind of show you what a kiwi looks like, and I did get to see them one of my last days when I was in Queenstown again on my way out. I went to a conservation facility where they had kiwi that they were raising, and so I got to see them, in that kind of setting. But they're really phenomenal, really crazy species.
So from Stewart Island, we're going to hop on another ferry to Ulva Island, and they actually give you your boarding pass, and it's written on a leaf.
Which we have one.
Yeah, which we actually have up here on the table, although it's considerably drier now that it's out of that environment.
Yeah. The Ulva Island's really special because it's predator-free, and it's been predator-free since the 90s. And so it's a really big, like, natural bird sanctuary. And so this is where you go. The one species in particular is saddlebacks. And so we have a photo of the saddleback on here, but that's kind of like the species that people go to this island for. But we also got to see a lot of these other species really like up close and personal. So they had all these different trails that you could do. They had a conservation trail, they had a nature trail, they had a history trail. And so you got to kind of learn about different things, about predator control, and then about the birds while you're walking around. So this is the New Zealand robin. They are super friendly, and they follow you around. So as you scuff your feet, they are attracted to the fact that you are brushing up leaves and stuff like that, and they hone in on the insects that you're then kind of stirring up. So they just follow you while you're walking.
And these guys are extremely difficult to photograph. And they were really cool, so it really upset me that I couldn't get a good one. So this is a fantail, and they are just the quickest, fleeting little birds. And it's like, you'd see it and like, oh, missed it. So, yeah, this is about as good as I can get.
This is a really interesting plant. They call it a dinosaur plant. It's over 4 million years old. And it's found on a lot of these islands that are off of New Zealand. So you'd see it here on Ulva, it was on Stewart, and it was on Codfish and Anchor. And so some of these islands are off of the main island. And so yeah, it was just a really cool, interesting little species. And it's really easy to overlook, but yeah, it's been around for a really long time. I have it in the book right there. I don't know the signs. I forget.
Elizabeth.
Yeah, I have this little Ola Island book. You can, yeah.
That individual plant isn't for the species.
No, the species. Yeah, the species.
Got it.
And this was also kind of cool. They called this chicks and hens, so it was how these ferns reproduced. And the little tiny leaflet that you see there will actually drop off, and when it drops off, if it lands, roots down, it will become a new plant. So that's how this particular fern reproduces. Supplejack, it's everywhere. It is a nightmare to bushwhack through. But again, it's kind of a cool species. Lots of birds.
invasive or it's?
No, it's not. It's native. You can actually eat it, like the new shoots. You can actually eat the new shoots. It kind of tastes like green.
Should have brought some back.
I know, right? So this is what they call Bushman's Friend, and that's what the Ova Island, our little tickets were written on, and so it makes really good toilet paper, I guess. And people actually in New Zealand, you can use it as a postcard, and so you can write on it and actually send them in the mail. So it's kind of cool. So this is the saddleback. So this is the species that we went to Ola Island to see, and we did see quite a few of them. But again, hard to get good photos, so thank you, Jake. Silver eyes were a pretty common species to see pretty much everywhere we went in New Zealand. Yellowheads, these guys are super cool. They actually have family groups, so their young will stay with them for a couple of years, and they have these huge flocks, and they just chitter-chatter around, so you'll hear them before you see them. And sometimes you don't see them. They're very cryptic, and but man, they're beautiful, and they make a really lovely chittery sound. But it was really cool that they have these really super large family groups that range in age. So this is just an example of predator control. So at one time on the island, they actually had this grid system to trap predators in. And then, as Jason had mentioned before, most of the trails in New Zealand, the Great Walks, have these little tag markers that indicate trap boxes. So, wood pigeon.
It was back on Stewart Island.
They're huge. And I guess what was really kind of cool about them that I had learned was that they don't communicate vocally, that they actually communicate with their wing beats. And so you would hear them flying through the trees, and the sounds were always different. And I never, I was kind of like, wow, that's kind of strange. It never really sounds the same. It's kind of different every time they fly around, and that's why, because that's how they communicate with each other, is actually through wing beats. And the sounds that they make when they fly. And that was that, I guess.
And then I left.
And then Jason left, and I got to go work with Kako. So Jason ended up going back, and then I spent another 2 weeks on Codfish Island, which is off of Stewart Island, working with Kako. And I was working with them as what they called me a staff development volley. So instead of volunteers, we're called volleys. And so I was staff development, meaning that I had some bird experience. I've handled birds in the past. And I knew about birds and have had that kind of background. And so I got kind of thrown into a couple of different things that you wouldn't normally get thrown into without that background. So this is a kakapo, for those of you who don't know what a kakapo is. And it's a giant, I shouldn't say giant, but it is a really big land parrot. So they're flightless, they're nocturnal, and they're endangered. The saying goes that there's 125 of them left, but there's actually probably a little more than that at this point. But they're kind of tweaking that number. And then after this breeding year, hopefully there will be maybe close to 175. But they're only found on Codfish, Anchor, and then the Barrier Islands. So there's just the 3 populations in the world. And something else that's really cool about this species is that they're kind of like a grouse. The males make these bowls, and then they fluff up all the vegetation. It's really interesting. They actually make a trail right to their bowl. And the trail goes quite a ways out. So they're like luring the females, like showing them the way to their bowl. And so they form leks. So a lot of the males will have multiple bowls and they will overlap. Their territories will overlap. And so they're competing for females. And when I was on the island, we'll have to click this too, then the males were kind of finishing their booming, but there were some that were still booming. And so this is a male.
And then get it?
Yeah, I think it was me. That's a good team.
So this male, I was kind of bummed because I was never in a spot where I could hear a booming kakapo. And one night I was sitting in my tent and this guy was right next to my tent. And he boomed all night. And at first I was like, oh my God, this is so awesome, it's booming. And then I was like, wait, is he gonna do this all night? And he did. And he boomed, and then in between booming, they do something called scrocking, where they just so I got woken up numerous times. I was like, oh my God, what's happening? What's happening? And it was, yeah, it was kind of, so it was really cool to actually be able to hear it. I wasn't sure I was gonna.
Some people have never been boomed in this crop.
Exactly.
Most people.
Right. So the kakapo are, a very interesting species. But before I could get onto the island, we actually had to go through quarantine. And this is not a good representation of quarantine, but it's one of the only pictures that I could find kind of in a short amount of time. I didn't take any myself, but I had to wash everything before I got to the island, and there's a special solution. I had to wash all my clothes in, my shoes had to be cleaned, and then once you get to quarantine, you have to unload everything. I mean, your socks, everything has to be unloaded, and technically nothing can touch the ground. So they have like crates and stuff that you put everything on. And then once you've unloaded everything that you think you're gonna need for the island, they take you into like this super secret, really super sterilized room. And so once you're in there, they actually inspect all your clothes, they turn your socks inside out, they make sure that there aren't any seeds on anything, that you're not bringing any feathers, that that nothing is going to be coming to the island that shouldn't be there. So they vacuum out your shoes, yeah.
So are the only people who are allowed on codfish scientists, or?
No, they have volunteers coming all the time.
But it's not inhabited.
No, nobody lives there, but the researchers that are there,
So if someone just wanted to go there not affiliated with the research projects, they can?
No,
Okay.
it's not open to the public. So we got to the island by either helicopter or by plane. And so this is a helicopter ride over, and you can see that's Codfish Island in the distance. A little closer view. And then once we got to the island, there was this huge exchange. So there was 12 people that were leaving the island, and there was 12 of us coming onto the island. And so we did this big shifting of unloading and reloading the helicopter. Kind of similar to what you see around here. Lots of junk washes up on the beach. And then this is the hut. So there's the main hut. They do have a volunteer that comes to cook. So if any of you are really great cooks, that's a great opportunity to get out there. And so the kitchen, and there's bunks for people that end up staying the night at the hut. There's research facilities. They have a little lab there. They have a portacom, which is essentially a glorified connex where they're incubating eggs and chicks, and that's kind of where the chicks live. Its temperature and humidity is really well managed in there. So this is where this is like the main spot on the island. And there's just immaculate views. So this is actually the view from the toilet. So they have a composting toilet, and so this is where you go in the morning to kind of see what the weather was going to be like that day. You're like, oh my gosh, I can see Stewart Island. It's going to be awesome. But the real reason why we were there was to work with these guys, the Kakapo. And so there's a couple different volunteers. So I was staff development, which works right underneath the researchers. And then there was about volunteers that were called feed-out volleys. And so these guys were responsible for going, they had different treks that they did every day to make sure they had these feeding stations. And so this is Sinbad, and he's at his feeding station, and there's two different types of feeding station. This is what they call the smart feeder. And this feeder has a data logger that's attached to it, and so all of the birds actually have backpack transmitters, and they all have their own individual frequency. And so with these smart feeders, what ends up happening is that that feeder knows that bird, one bird. It knows like who Sinbad is. And it will not open up that feeder unless Sinbad is in the area. And so if there's another bird in a certain radius of that feeder, it will not open. But it will register, Kuahi or, Amy was at that feed out station at this time. So you get an idea of what birds are in the area and what birds are kind of hanging out where. There's other feed out stations that don't have the data logger that are just open. So any bird that was in the area could essentially access the food source if they wanted to. And so these feed out stations are there for birds that are in poor health, that maybe need to gain a little extra weight, or for birds like some of the females where there's a lot of natural food, but maybe it's a little bit too far for them to go and they have to get back to their chick. And so they'll kind of hone in on the supplemental food while also supplying natural food, but it's just an extra source so that the females keep their weight and their babies stay healthy. So as a feed-out volley, what you're doing is you're cleaning these stations, everything gets sanitized. Some of the birds have this disease that's called crusty bum. It's specific to kakapo, but they don't want it to spread from kakapo to kakapo, and they don't really know what it will do to humans, so you gotta kind of keep everything clean. And so they're sanitizing and cleaning everything, and then they're feeding the birds. So that's one of the volunteers. And then the other volunteers are what they call nest finders. This is just an example of the trails. So their trail names, the trails were all really different on the island, but there were some that were terrible. I was telling Jason, we literally went uphill both ways. I mean, you would go up the hill to get where you were going, and you had to go back up the hill to get back to camp. So, it was pretty good trails and bad trails. So the other volunteer are what they call nest minders, which pretty much you were monitoring a nest. And so this is a list of all the females. I think there was 19 or 20 females. These are the ones in particular that we were monitoring. It gives us a list of the female. It tells us if she has eggs, if she's on fertile eggs, if she's on dummy eggs, if she has chicks. And then there's a whole other list of what you have to bring to camp and things like that. So you kind of know what you're getting into for that night. And then what they end up doing, so I got to do this quite a bit too, was you go out to a different nest site pretty much every night. In my case, there were a couple of females that had chicks or needed a little extra attention, so I might go to the same nest a couple of nights in a row. But you would go on the main trails, and then you would look for this. There would be a tree, there would be a stump, there would be something that would be flagged with pink tape, and then you would know that you would have to veer off the main trail, and it would lead you to your campsite for the night. And the campsite, so the nest site would then be, it was usually a little ways away. But what would happen is that the birds have these backpack transmitters, and they're not just giving a frequency, but they're also outputting extra data. So with the females, they have something called an egg timer, and they can get activity of the female, they can get heart rates on the female, and all this additional information. And from the heart rate, you can tell, you know if the female is incubating. So when you use your little aerial transmitter device, and you'll hone in on a female, and if her heart rate, I think it was 48 beats per minute, she's incubating. So you know she has a nest. And so then the focus would be, okay, where is her nest? They'd find the nest. Once they found the nest, they put a camera inside of it, and then they put a trigger mechanism on the door. And it's an invisible trigger, but and I'll get to that. You'll get to hear the sound that I got to hear every night when that triggered. But it would allow you to then know when the female was leaving the nest, when she was coming back, how long was she gone, and then a couple of the females, there were issues with other birds and male kakapo that would get, they call them intruders. And so, but what ends up happening is that the camera and this, what they call a ding-dong, was wired to the tent site. And so when you were in the tent, we would do something that was called Kakapo TV. So you have a junction box. So there's a junction box at the nest site that the camera is attached to and that this ding-dong is attached to. There's this long cable that goes up to the tent site. And when I was in my tent, I would hook up my battery to the junction box and then I would hook up my monitor. And as soon as I got to the nest, I'd turn on that monitor and I'd see if there was a female in the nest. So I don't know if you guys can see that, but there's a bird on the nest. So she's sitting there. And I would call in and say, yep, she's on her nest. And then you could watch Kakapo TV if you wanted, or you could shut it, you could do whatever you wanted. And then when she left the nest, in this case, that bird's name was Cindy, she had 2 dummy eggs in her nest. And so when she left the nest, I call and I say, oh, Cindy left her nest, and she's got the 2 eggs. And they go, okay, cool. This is the video. So, yeah. So when the female would leave the nest, this is the sound we heard to let us know. So that's why it's called a ding dong. So throughout the night, this is what would wake you up. And depending on the female, some of them only left once, some of them left 5 times, And so whenever that was triggered, you had to call in and let them know. And then every bird had a different status.
Why did you have to call in constantly?
Because they're recording that information. So if a female was on dummy eggs, you didn't really have to call in. They would want to know like when she left her nest. You'd need to call in, or we would also have data sheets too. So if they had dummy eggs, it wasn't as big of a deal. But we had ones that were on chicks, and we had ones that were on fertile eggs. And so when they have chicks, or if they're on fertile eggs, they shouldn't be gone for very long. But there were some females that were notorious for staying off the nest entirely too long, which kind of means that they're unsuitable at certain stages. So some females were terrible with their chicks, and they weren't feeding them properly, or they wouldn't come back, like they should be. And so then you would kind of have to intervene. So it was just kind of finding.
Go feed the chicks? Or
yeah, we would feed the chicks. Sometimes the chicks would get pulled, and a dummy egg would get put in place, and the chick would get nursed back to health, and then put back with the female. So there was definitely a lot of manipulation that was going on. This is another video. I don't know if we'll watch too much of it, but this is, if you do watch Kakapo TV, this is Kuiki, and she's feeding her chick. And so I don't know if you can see it really well, but there's a little white blob, and that little white blob is the chick, and it's only 2 days old. And so the chick is it's begging, and then she's feeding it. So their beaks kind of connect, and so it was really cool if she had a chick. They were usually really active if there was a chick involved. You'd see them when the chicks get older. They don't like to they don't like to nestle under the female like they should, and so the chicks are fighting the mom, and she's trying to get the chick under her. And so, yeah, it's pretty cool. Yep. Oh, I'm going around, sorry. So if a bird had a chick, once the female left the nest, we would go and do a chick check. And so we would reach into the nest. This is Jen reaching in. Some of the nests are super duper deep, and you couldn't reach them, and we would have little scoops that we would use to scoop out the chicks. We check the chicks, see if they were healthy, so we're looking for hydration. We're looking to see if their crop is full, or how full the crop is. How are the heartbeats and things like that. So just kind of checking overall health. We would also weigh them, and we definitely called this stuff in. And they had a whole spreadsheet and a whole model that they would plug the information into, and then let us know, oh yeah, the chick is doing great. And there were other times where the chick wasn't doing so great, so then we might have to feed the chick or we might have to bring the chick back to get additional feeding. So this is a chick that's a couple of days old, and you can see like its face is kind of messy, and so you know they're having a little bit of a problem connecting, but it's not too bad. He's not too bad off. And what was really great is a lot of the work is happening at night, and so this is a terrible photo, but when I was walking along at night, the kakapo were really super active. You'd hear them when you were laying in your tent, kind of scuttering around. And this guy, that green blob on the right side of the tree is actually a kakapo, and he's just looking at me. And I was looking at him, and I was kind of waiting for him to do his thing so that I could keep walking on the trail, and eventually he kind of scuttered off into the trees. And we also saw tons of bats. The bats were just crazy there, and there were a bunch of roosting trees, and they would just be flying around, super vocal, so that was really cool too. And so this is a chick that got brought back to the porticom, that they called it, and they had vets that were on hand to help if a bird was really sick or if it needed any additional help, and so the vet's going to feed this little chick. And so you make it beg, so you do the begging action, because the female, when she puts her mouth over the top of the little baby's mouth, they actually have sensors on the side of their beak that it starts their metabolism, so that they can take that food and they actually start to process it like they should. And so you actually beg the chick before you give it the food, so that its metabolism starts to go, and then you feed it, and then you'll beg it after, so that it can kind of start to process the food. So this guy's only a couple days old. And then this guy, this is Beatty. He's probably like 10, I think he was 10 to 18 days old, so maybe he's somewhere in there. And so she's begging him, getting him, to respond, and then she fed him, and then he would smile afterwards. It's like ugly but cute at the same time. And so a lot of the work was happening at night, but we would also do stuff during the day. And so we're going out and we're going to capture a couple of birds. So there are multiple days where we went out and we would usually capture about 2 birds a day to do health checks. And so we take the transmitters out and they call them T4s, take them out, find the bird, and then we would try to capture them. And we're just capturing them by hand. So they're super cryptic, they're really hard to see, and they're super fast. But Jen was really good. She could get within a couple of meters of the bird, and she would be like, it's right there. And it was like, all right. And then you just kind of have to watch and try to find this green thing among the green vegetation. And usually it would move just a little bit where you would see it, and you could just, and just pick it up. But there were other times where they'd scutter up a tree. And I don't know if you can see it up in the tree there. They're kind of hard to see. But she's just looking down at us like, So we had to have it multiple times. So they'd go up a tree, and then there's nothing you can do. But once you do capture one, what we tended to do is we find a nice spot beforehand that we could lay all of our equipment down and kind of prep it and get it ready. You have to hand sanitize. You can never, you're always hand sanitizing everything. Everything has to be super clean when you're dealing with them. We'd capture it, and you'd hold it just like that. You'd hold it right behind on either side of its mouth so that it can still move its mouth. It can't lunge, and it can't bite you. And then you hold its feet so that it's not going to be scratching and kicking around. And we'd actually stick it inside of a bag until we got back to the site that we were at, and then we would take it out, and then I would be the one that got to hold I was usually the one that got to pull the kakapo. And then with the health checks, they do weight, they check the batteries, the battery pack, or they check the transmitter backpack to make sure it fits. It's not too loose, it's not too tight. And we check their ears, we check their eyes, and kind of do an overall check just to make sure that everything was okay with the birds. And then they would draw blood and stuff as well. And my favorite part about them was their whiskers. They were just once you saw them up close, they were just a magical bird. I instantly fell in love with it. And it smells so good. I was told by numerous people, kakapos smell amazing. And I'm like, that's so weird. but they do. They smell like lemon, like a lemon honey mix. And so you can see why, you know, they're so cryptic and they're so camouflaged. They just blend in with everything. So you're kind of like, well, how are they so endangered? But that smell is just so, I mean, so potent that the predators would just hone in on it and kind of devastate the population that way. So here's just some photos of the island and some of the cool views. This is the beach. We spend a lot of time there. And this is a view from up above. There were numerous like observation points. So as you're kind of trekking the island, depending on where you were for that day, a lot of times there was some place that you could go with a really beautiful view. This was one of my favorite trails. This was to a bird named Ruth. Her nest was in this amazing place. It was full of Easter orchids. And so it just smelled so beautiful in there. It was full of ferns and just really, really nice. And the island had multiple different habitat types spread across it. So this was kind of more of a ferny, palm fern area, and this is where the petrels lived. So there were mottled petrels in particular that had large burrowing communities out there spread throughout this area. So you had to be kind of careful when you were walking around so that you weren't stepping on anybody. But yeah, just some really beautiful, this was one of my favorite spots. This is where the males live. One in particular, Sinbad, who does have an affinity for humans, so you had to be kind of careful when you were walking through this territory, but it was really, really beautiful. Another cool thing is this mushroom, which is only found in New Zealand, Australia, and India. And so we saw this. It was starting to be their fungus time of year. There was like fungus everywhere. It was really exciting. So I got to see some of those, which was cool. And then this is an endangered species, and I do have the scientific name right here. But yeah. But anyways, it's an endangered plant. It was wiped out by the possums. The possums just destroyed it. And once the possums were removed from these like barrier islands, I guess you could call them, they're flourishing. And they're doing amazing. So it was really cool to see the species that. So this is the mottled petrel colony. There was a PhD student on the island that was doing research on this colony, so I went out with her for a day to get to touch what she called the fluffies. And so she was monitoring the burrows and monitoring the chicks that she would find within the burrows, taking weights and doing different types of measurements to document the health of the population. And so she had this crazy snake-like contraption that had a camera on the end, and she would stick that into the burrow, and if she found a chick, we would then make a hatch, kind of in the general vicinity of where the chick was, and so that we could easily access the chick, pull it out, do the health checks, and put the chick back. So I helped her dig a couple of, she had to dig in some of the holes. So this is her reaching into one of the hatches to pull out the little fluffy. There he is, just sitting in there. Some of them were more well-behaved than others. And this one was actually starting to get its adult plumage. This guy actually had his flight feathers. He was starting to get the face. And that's pretty common with the mottled petrels. But what was interesting with them, we had to be really careful. And when I first went in to grab them, she was telling me to be really careful on how I kind of put my hands under their belly. And I pulled this little guy out, and he was just squishy. And she explained it like they're like water balloons. So they're not, and that's exactly what it was. It felt like I was holding a fluffy water balloon. They're really underdeveloped, and they'll develop, as they grow. But it was just like this squishy, fluffy ball. And their feathers were just, they were just so fluffy. So a couple of the other birds that were kind of special on the island, this is a Campbell Island teal. These guys are actually really, so I guess they're a burrowing bird, And they bother the petrels. They get into a lot of trouble with the petrels, actually, and they will push petrels out of their burrows. And there was one Campbell Island teal that got into a petrel burrow, and then there was a chick inside, and it actually attacked the chick, ripped part of its scalp off, and made a huge hole in its side. It was just like tearing this little chick apart, and I was like, oh my god, because look at how cute he is. And he's like attacking other birds. I was like, I don't know how to feel about you. I really like you, but I don't like the fact that you're attacking other birds. Yellow-eyed penguins were really common to see as well, mostly on the beach, but there was one day that one got up this trail quite far. He was probably halfway, I don't know how he got there. And I was walking down the trail, and it was raining, and I looked up, and there was this penguin. And again, another endangered species, so you have to kind of keep your distance around him. And they don't move. They just, he just stood there, and I was like, all right, bud, okay. And he's just like, no. And I ended up having to actually go around him. But really cool species. There's pipits. They tended to be a little bit higher up. Tomtits, this is a little juvenile tomtit. So there were babies, all over the place, which was really fun. And then this is a moorpoke, or what they call a roo-roo. And you would hear them calling at night when you're laying in your tent. And I was really hoping I would see one, and it wasn't happening, And this guy, I was walking along, I heard some rustling in the tree, and he jumped up onto a piece of supplejack, and he just looked at me. And then he got closer. And then he got closer, and then he got closer, and he was just kind of like doing this like watching me. But it was really cool because I actually got to see him, and they said that that's, they are pretty hard to see since they are more nocturnal, and this was kind of at dusk, so I think he was just out hunting. And these are yellow-headed parakeets, or yellow-faced parakeets, and they call them kakariki. So this is an adult pair. And then their baby was just right up in the tree next to me when I was walking down the path. And there were some kakariki that had nested in the woodpile at camp. So I got to hear them every day kind of flying around. And then another really special bird to the island is the fern bird, which I saw on one of my last days. They make their nests in these giant fern plants. And again, they're really cryptic, and you don't usually see them all the time, but I was lucky enough to, again, rustling in the bushes. What's that? Oh, cool. Oh, bird. Other cool things, skinks. So the skinks, and there are geckos as well, but the geckos are really super uncommon, and they weren't really sure if they were on the island or not still, but the skinks definitely were. So a couple of pictures of skinks. This one's a really pregnant female. And that's it. That's what I got. That's what we got. But if you want to find out more about Kakapo, this is an amazing website. And you can learn more about Kakapo, about the kind of research that's happening. You can adopt a Kakapo. So definitely check that out if you're interested in learning more.
If you send me that link, I can send it to the group.
Oh yeah, that'd be awesome. Yeah, it's a really great website.
Wow.
There we go. That's it.
Are there any questions?
What was in the mixture you were feeding the cockapoo?
It's a certain supplemental feed. I'm not entirely sure. It's partly Rimu. So Rimu is their main food source. It's this really beautiful. We did have a picture at one time in our presentation of it, but they focus on the berries that are on the Rimu tree and then beech trees as well. So there's a combination of that with this kind of standard bird formula, but not just any bird formula worked. They had tried multiple different formulas, and they either wouldn't gain weight like they should, or they weren't healthy. And so this particular supplement had everything, but it wasn't quite right, the vet said, but it was good enough where it was doing what it was supposed to.
And how much does an adult cockapoo weigh? Are they heavy birds? Is there a bird?
They were, I'm trying to think of how many kilos. They're not that heavy. No, a couple of pounds. They're not heavy at all.
few were there when they started the recovery program? Like
25, I think, 2025.
About even sex ratio? or-
I think so, yes, so.
And so the mating is, how does that work? I mean, is it one male, one female?
No, they're promiscuous. Yeah, it's one male, multiple females. And the females will, and because of that, a female might have 2-3 males that mate with it. And so whoever's sperm's the last sperm will be the one that typically takes.
So there's a fair amount of diversity, genetic diversity.
Yes and no. There's a lot of inbreeding that happens, and so that's where it becomes really interesting with these transmitters. With the males, so they have the frequency, and then they have this other frequency that happens that gives you a code, and from that code, it will tell you a time frame of when the male has mated because of his activity level. And then from that time frame, you can then look at the females. You can then look at the females that were in the area, and you can determine which female they mated with. And so there are brothers and sisters that mate, and moms and sons and stuff. And if that happens, they'll come in with artificial insemination, and they'll actually put someone else's sperm into the female so that the incest doesn't occur.
So who pays for all of this? Is there a National Science Foundation?
It's something really similar to that. I mean, a lot of it's, it's through the Department of Conservation, and a lot of it's donation, and so some of this other expensive stuff, it happens through kind of like, the Forest Service and these other agencies. They're a state or, a state agency essentially. So it's coming from their funding source. But they do try to get a lot of help from, yeah.
Any other questions? Well, thank you. It was
Yeah.
fascinating.
You're welcome.